Fee, fi, fo, fum. Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate here, and welcome back to the Elder Scrolls. More specifically, welcome back to Skyrim. It's been a hot minute since we've last braved the winters of the Nine Holds, but today we return with a very noble and worthy cause in mind. Indeed, today we are going to be investigating the origins and nature of one of the province's most iconic and mysterious inhabitants. No, not the Nords themselves. Better, the Giants. Standing at roughly twice the size and possessing several more times the strength as a normal man, these towering bearded beasts are spread across a number of small, sparse campsites across Skyrim, which, lucky for everyone else, they rarely stray far from. Their features are bizarre, to say the least. Human-like faces with masculine beards, but strangely bearing the pointed ears of elves. And they tend to decorate themselves and their camps with odd symbols and swirly motifs and large rock-like obelisks. There are hints of a deeper giant faith of sorts. They enjoy a tenuous but mostly peaceful relationship with their human neighbors, emphasis on the word mostly, and are known to generally mind their own business. However, when their camps are intruded upon and their mammoth herds disturbed, they make little time for mercy. But where exactly do these brutish yet gentle creatures come from? What is the strange religion they seem to follow, and what can they tell us about ourselves? Well, ladies and gentlemen, by following a trail of clues left in Skyrim and picked up in ESO, with some rather recent new revelations, and exploring some interesting bits of cut content and out-of-game sources, today we are going to set out to investigate and answer those very questions. So, pour out a glass of your finest Colovian brandy, throw a fresh log on the fire, have Lydia get out of your hair for a while, and relax, as we investigate the origins and nature of Skyrim's giants. But first, a quick word from today's video sponsor. This video is being brought to you by World of Tanks. Take charge of your choice of over 600 tanks and other motorized pieces of machinery from the fields of the Somme to the early modern era, in the most immersive and realistic experience of its kind. Engage in epic strategic team battles, or go solo in mechanized cavalry free-for-alls. While well known for its attention to detail and accurate representation of each vehicle's strengths and weaknesses, World of Tanks also allows users to customize their own selection, with various modifications and camouflages to suit your playstyle. Whether you prefer to tactically duel from a distance, or confront your enemies head-on with steel, World of Tanks has whatever you're looking for. Play World of Tanks for free now on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, using my link and code COMBAT. New players will receive a free British Premium Medium tank, 250,000 credits, 7 days of premium access, and several rental tanks for 10 battles each. Existing players will get 3 days of premium access, a unique camouflage, a 7-day rental of a premium tank, or 100,000 credit compensation if you already have that tank. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Alright, so I think the most obvious place to begin an investigation of this nature is by taking a look at what we can learn from the Giants' own camps, as it's around their bonfires and splattered on their stones that the real mysteries come to life. And I think Bethesda has deliberately left us a sort of trail of clues in many of these locations that reveal much about their essence. In total, there are 12 separate giant encampments across Skyrim, and they're notably all sort of clustered together in the northern central region of the map. It would be rather tedious to visit all of them, but a few can tell us an interesting story. The most westerly of these locations is Talking Stone Camp, located on the western edge of Whiterun, right on the banks of the River Hjal. It'll usually only be populated by about 2 or 3 giants and a similar number of mammoths, who themselves are always out at pasture near the river. The mammoths here and really all mammoths in giant custody, have a unique engraving on their tusks. It's the same sort of swirl that we see painted in motifs all over their camps on rocks and such. Approaching from the north, we'll see that Talking Stone Camp sits on a sort of crag, and is defended by some rudimentary fortifications, including spikes and these weird stones that may be natural to the region or may have been placed intentionally from somewhere else. It's not obvious. Central to the camp, and all other giant camps, is its bonfire, where a couple of skeevers are being roasted. And facing west is something particularly peculiar. The giants here have laid out a number of their own clubs, as well as human weapons, armors, and even a few troll skulls in front of a single rock formation, which is decorated with an assortment of those same painted swirls and line patterns we've already seen. It's almost like this is a shrine of sorts where the creatures are offering sacrifice. It beckons the name, Talking Stone Camp. Are these those stones? Are these the talking stones? It's almost certainly not a coincidence that the two rocks are aligned with true east and west, and when the sun falls every evening, it will actually pass between the stones, which to me conveys an obvious ritual significance of some kind. This is the first of a few references, which we'll discuss throughout this video, to some sort of celestial or cosmic religion being practiced by the creatures. But alas, there's more to this camp than just esoteric symbolism. Believe it or not, every day at around 2 p.m., there's a small chance that the grazing mammoths out on the pasture will suddenly be attacked by a random bandit raiding party, who, despite fighting ferociously, will always be dispatched by the tusked beast and their shepherds with little fanfare. A few paces to the north, we can find the source of these belligerent raiding parties, at Orothime Cave, a small cavern inhabited by a similarly small clan of bandits, who obviously have a thing for mammoth hunting. The site's entrance is littered with the skeletal remains of several fallen mammoths, and inside we can even find a few trunks being harvested actively. Clearly, the clan here has been locked in something of a struggle with the giants at Talking Stone over their mammoth herd. A note we can find in the bandit chief's inventory here confirms as such. Quote, "Damn those giants. Just one mammoth would feed us for a month, but they herd them around like prized cattle, never taking an eye off them. We've hunted this area dry. Unless we get a kill soon, we'll have to find somewhere else to camp." End quote. Fittingly, once Orothime Cave has been cleared, the bandit attacks on Talking Stone will cease. This helps us illustrate a sort of symbiotic relationship giants and mammoths share with each other. While at first glance, the giants seem to just be shepherds herding around the creatures, not unlike a human herds sheep, it's heavily implied that the mammoths are here following giants on their own accord. They view them as valuable protectors against poachers and provide their milk in exchange. The book, Giants: A Discourse, says the following about the matter. They have a curious relationship with their mammoths. They don't herd these creatures, but they seem to be able to communicate with them. They protect them, and in return they get milk, cheese, and companionship. On occasion, I have seen a giant eat a mammoth. The meal was conducted with reverence, though, if such a concept could be applied to a simple giant. End quote. Moving on from Talking Stone, the second camp on our itinerary is just a little ways west, but still in Whiterun, Sukunda's Kiss. The Skyrim official game guide, published by Prima Games and written by Bethesda, says the following about this location. Quote, This site holds special significance to giants, who make regular pilgrimages here for some mysterious reason. Slay the site's protective guardians if you can, then plunder the gold and valuables from their corpses and from the chest near the bonfire." End quote. Interesting. So this is some sort of ritual site. Notably, Sukunda's Kiss will usually be defended by 1 to 2 giants and features no domesticated mammoth herd of its own, though is centered around a stage-like obelisk with 2 columns, where mammoth skulls are placed on top and the rib cages of several more surround the structure. This seems to be the object of the ritual sites that the giants are drawn to. But what is this? Some kind of mourning ritual for their fallen friends, perhaps? Something else? The name Sukunda's Kiss is particularly noteworthy, and it can be interpreted in a number of ways. Sukunda is, of course, the smaller of the 2 moons that appears over Skyrim's night sky, the other, larger one, of course, being Masser. My initial impression of this camp's name was that it could refer to some celestial or cosmic impact of some kind, like an asteroid or comet. Get it? Sukunda's Kiss? Such an impact would look like the moon kissing Nirn, but while poetic, there's no real evidence of that here. No craters or impact markers of any kind, so that seems unlikely. My other guess is that when looking at the area from the far west or far east at night, it sometimes seems as though the moon Sukunda disappears into the mountain slope adjacent to the camp. So that may be a more probable origin for the name. Whatever the case, it further alludes to an affinity the giants seem to have for the sky above. Also in the camp is another classic bonfire and some roasting skeevers, but there's not much more capable of piquing our interest, so let's continue our tour. Once again, further to the west, we can find Gul'dan Rock, spelled with U's rather than E's, and located high in the mountains near Valtheim. The pathway up here is marked by several more giant painted stone obelisks, like we've seen in all the other camps, and when we arrive, it'll be guarded by a giant or 2. Interestingly enough, there seems to have once been some sort of probably ancient Nord structure here. We can find the rubble of a couple of pillars, and the giants' bonfire is located atop of a ruined platform of some kind. Unlike the others, this fire doesn't seem to be used for the warmth of the camp's inhabitants, but looks more like a signal fire. Its placement on this perch makes it visible from quite a distance, and given the fact that Gul'dan Rock is home to no mammoths, but has a huge quantity of mammoth cheese lying around, my suspicion is that this is a giant trading post of some kind. Such a theory is reinforced when you enter the adjacent cave, creatively named Gul'dan Rock Cave. It's a small cavern consisting of just one single large room that'll be unoccupied, though decorated with several more obelisks and paintings. There are some roasting skeevers, a recently fallen cow waiting to be butchered, and even some suspicious human remains. But towards the back of the structure will lie a few coin purses, some loose septums, a filled soul gem, and a copy of the book Knights of the Nine. These items will be laid out on a stone platform of sorts before a handful of bone chimes. It almost looks like this is another ritual offering of some kind, similar to what we saw at Talking Stone Camp, but it's hard to be sure. A question that this camp really forces us to revisit is where on earth are these giant obelisks coming from? They're all made of a certain type of rock, clearly not cut from anywhere nearby. How the heck did they get these things all the way up here? Are the giants literally picking them up and hauling them all this way, moving them up mountains to their camps? The creatures are obviously strong, but are they that strong? Well, as we'll discuss later on in the video, I have a theory about this. But to make a long story short, for now, I think the answer is yes. The giants appear to be somehow moving these giant rocks to their locations. But alas, let's move on with our tour of giant encampments. West of this mountain peak, just a short swim down the river, lies Cradle Crush Rock, inhabited by a single lonesome giant keeping warm by the smoldering embers of his recently extinguished fire. A fallen alchemist lies splattered at the giant's feet, and nearby we can witness the camp's namesake. A number of squashed skeletons can be found crushed beneath the weight of a single massive boulder. It's heavily implied here that the giant threw this boulder on top of a group of people for intruding on his camp. Again, giants are strong, but this is another allusion to a particularly uncanny strength they seem to possess. This boulder isn't by any means light. It must weigh at least a few thousand or so pounds. So where are they getting the strength to move these massive rocks? Could it be something they're eating? Well, nearby the smoldering embers of the bonfire, atop a stacked wood pile, is a dead, painted cow. This is a nod to a certain tradition involving giants that we can sometimes learn about during a random encounter. You see, when wandering the roads of the Nine Holds, it's occasionally possible to come across a lone farmer leading a painted cow into a giant's camp. When approached, the farmer will explain his rationale.
I'd stay away if I were you. I'm on my way to a giant camp, and I can't guarantee those beasts won't think you're part of the offering. Keep your distance, and you shouldn't have anything to worry about. The cow, of course. Others do it differently. But I found that an annual offering usually keeps the giants away from our livestock. Some think it's superstition, but I believe it works. I've yet to have a giant kill any of my livestock. It's tradition. We mark the animal as a way to let the giants know we're giving it to them willingly. Sort of a peace offering. I have everything under control. Thanks for offering. Thanks. You take care of yourself now.
So, farmers have realized that by offering giants a cow once in a while, of their own accord, the creatures will essentially enter in an agreement not to raid their farms. Notably, this cow is decorated with an assortment of blue swirls that sort of mimic the swirly motifs we found painted around giant camps. Hilariously, if you follow this farmer around for 20 or so minutes, he'll eventually arrive at a randomly selected giant camp. But Bethesda doesn't seem to have coded them to de-aggro, so the creatures will just murder the farmer to death and take his cow, which will proceed to just mill around for a while. We'll have more to say about this unique tradition soon. But for now, let's move on. And as a matter of fact, let's also take a break from cataloging giant camps altogether, and instead discuss some specific quests and events in the game that are often overlooked, but seem to reveal some very interesting bits of lore. When the player first approaches the Orcish Stronghold of Largashbur in the Rift, you'll find its walls being stormed by a giant, as several unnamed Orcish defenders meet their doom attempting to resist. After the creature has eventually been slain, and it eventually will be as a couple of the orcs are essential, whether or not you choose to help, the Dragonborn can approach the walls and speak to a Tub, a particularly polite orc shield maiden manning the gates, who will explain her tribe's current desperate situation. Evidently, their chief, a once well-liked warrior named Yarmars, slowly lost his way over the years. He's become cowardly and averse to battle. The nearby giant clans, sensing Largashbur's weakness, now intrude upon Orcish lands, seizing the opportunity. Atub blames Yarmars' newfound weakness on a curse placed on him by Malacath, the Daedric patron god of orcs and prince of curses. She'll petition the player to grab the ingredients necessary to summon Malacath, so she might petition him to restore her tribe's chief to his old, heroic self. Thus begins the quest, the Cursed Tribe. Now, it's never explained why Malacath cursed Yarmars, nor is it ever actually entirely confirmed that he did. All we know is that the chief of this stronghold grew weak, and the giants sensed this and pounced on their defenses as a result. Anyway, after gathering the ingredients, which are just some troll fat and a Daedra heart, a tub will perform the ritual and indeed summon the voice of Malacath himself. The god will harshly reprimand Chief Yarmars for his sudden cowardliness, specifically chastising the leader for allowing giants to overrun his, Malacath's, shrine near Fallowstone Grove. The Prince of Curses will agree to lift his spell on the orcs of Largashbur only if their chief mans up and clears out the giants from his shrine. After issuing this command, Malacath will cease his dialogue, and a cowering Yarmars will approach the player, begging that you help him take on the giants at Fallowstone Grove. The Dragonborn can try to explain to the chief that Malacath wanted him to do this and to do it alone, but it's of no use, and the scared orc promises heaps of gold if we agree. Thus, the two of you will set out for Fallowstone Grove. By the time of our arrival, Fallowstone will already clearly be giant territory. Their obelisks and trademark painted swirls decorate the entire place, and we'll have to cut our way through several of the beasts as we fight our way to the shrine itself, which will be a bizarrely grotesque sight when we find it. Guarded by a giant boss and littered with the skeletal and not-so-skeletal remains of several orcs, including a couple being roasted by the fire. What on earth? Many of the skeletons are bunched up right at the shrine's base, almost as if the giants are mocking Malacath with the bodies of his followers. Why would they do this? What would drive a clan of giants to desecrate and mock the shrine of the god of curses? It's one thing to exploit the weakness of a nearby tribe for territorial gain, as we were originally told the giants were doing, but to so brazenly desecrate and offend the shrine of their god is a whole nother thing. Surely, there's more going on here than just a land dispute. Whatever the case, when you and Yarmars finally arrive at the shrine and confront the giant leader there, Yarmars will beg the player to kill the giant themselves, and offer an even more substantial reward for doing so. You can accept this offer, or convince Yarmars that this is his fight to have, and force him to face it alone. If you do this, however, he'll just rush the giant and get killed in one hit, and you'll have to fight it alone anyway. If you agree to kill it for the Orcish chief, he'll turn on you after your success, claiming that no one can know the truth of what happened here. Either way, afterwards Malacath's voice will chime in, and congratulate the player on their great victory, and deride his pathetic, failed former chief. Upon returning to Largashbur, the orcs will gather around, Malacath will declare a new chief, and the quest will be completed. But what's never explained was what exactly the deal was with those giants. Why were they so angry at Malacath? Well, the Daedric god's fear is oaths, the ostracized, and curses. And as a consequence, many in the community have proposed that perhaps the giants are angry at Malacath for levying such a curse on them and seek retribution. Perhaps giants were once a different, more majestic creature transformed into their modern selves by such a curse levied by Malacath. While the games themselves provide little evidence for this theory, there is reason to take it seriously. You see, shortly before Skyrim's official release, in around 2008, Bethesda writer Michael Kirkbride, who contributed extensively to the universe's lore and several of the official pocket guides as well as books in Morrowind, published a story called The 7 Fights of the Aldudaga on Bethesda's official forums. Now, Kirk Pride did this a lot, both during and after his tenure with the company, publish unofficial lore and stories on forums, and while thus technically everything produced in such a context is just fanfiction, Given the fact that it was authored by such a prominent writer at the company, it may provide us some insight regarding what the developers have actually been thinking. Furthermore, several elements of his stories, including the ones we're about to read in the 7 Fights, have actually ended up becoming canon lore anyway, so it's definitely worth at least investigating. Anyway, the 7 Fights of the Aldudaga is an over 10,000 word document, consisting of 7 short stories from ancient primeval Nord history, told from the perspective of unreliable Nordic storytellers. One of these stories is called The 911th Cow, and specifically deals a great bit with the subject of giants. At least, sort of. Here's what it has to say about giant origins. The giants came from old Atmora, up there across the northern ice, back in the gone-to-twilight now age of myth, and settled here in Skyrim, and all along the mountain ranges of our coasts. Yes, they are our true ancestors. Do not believe your aunt from the university. And yes, we were once as big as them, but that is another story. Text lost. After the Great Calamity happened, the clan things, peoples, tribes, text seems to indicate mankind as a whole, though that is debatable, were kind of disrupted, and we Nords fell into fighting and drove our giant kin up into the mountaintops, and we were a wicked folk for many years, until all things had changed forever. Once the moot resumed sometime later, things got back to a normal semblance of normalcy, and borders were redrawn and agreed to within beer talk, and ratings of the Netherlands took everyone's mind off of old feuds. And pretty soon, well, not pretty soon, but whatever, the giants began to come down from their mountain ranges again. But they were a bit different than we Nords remembered. Or perhaps we had forgotten much, but they would not speak to us anymore. They would only smile in their lazy way, stomp over, and take our stuff. End quote. So, in this story, Kirkbride is connecting the giants with the initial Nord migration into Tamriel. Of course, longtime fans of the channel, and/or those of you who have read the Songs of the Return book series, know that before conquering Skyrim, the Nords lived on a now lost, frozen, northern continent called Atmora, and came south to wrestle control of Skyrim from the Snow Elves sometime in the late Merethic era. Kirkbride is suggesting that the giants were a part of that episode, and came alongside the Nords. In fact, he's implying the Nords were a bit more giant-like themselves back in the day, and declares giants to be their ancestor, and that after taking over Skyrim, the giants retreated into the mountains, and when they finally came back, they were somewhat changed, different and less willing to communicate. Could this change have something to do with their hatred of Malacath? Alas, the rest of the 911th Cow story is quite long, and not even I have the time to read the whole thing, but in summary, it goes on to tell the tale of a young girl named Alas, who's heavily implied to be the future first queen of Cyrodiil, Alicia, who discovers that giants can be befriended if you offer them cows with painted blue swirls. And yes, this unofficial Kirkbride story, published in 2008, does indeed seem to be where Bethesda got the idea for the whole offering giants blue-painted cows in Skyrim thing, lending this document a tremendous amount of credibility. But I digress. Alicia essentially attempts to paint a bunch of cows and use them to befriend an army of giants, which she hopes to then use to fight dragons or something. It's a long story. She meets this evil mage who promises to help her, but he's really Maroon's Dagon being sneaky. Alicia finds out the mage is tricking her and ends up sicking her new army of giants and some other friends on Maroon's Dagon instead. The end. It's honestly an insanely complicated story, and one of the hardest bits of Elder Scrolls lore to read and truly comprehend. You'd have an easier time reading Leo Strauss's commentaries of Plato, so you get the idea. In any case, whether or not Kirkbride's exact ideas about giants being this ancient Nord ancestor from Atmora are accurate, can't be confirmed by this document alone, however. Although, events and items in the Elder Scrolls Online, I think lend a bit of credence to some of these ideas. Indeed, perhaps one of the most damning revelations made by ESO is the existence of half-giants. Essentially, throughout the game, there are a handful of characters we can encounter who are the offspring of one Nordic parent and one giant one. The most prominent such NPC is a woman named Lyris Titanborn, who was born to a giant father and a Nord mother, who sadly passed away during childbirth as a consequence of Lyris' size. Lyris is about 7.5 feet tall, substantially larger than the tallest Nords, and the game's questlines later confirm her genealogy. This further hints at the possibility of some genetic affinity between the two peoples. However, it's not necessarily confirmation of anything in and of itself. We know in the Elder Scrolls universe, entirely different races can breed and bear fertile offspring. Bretons are said to be the product of elven interbreeding with Nedic humans in the Merethic era. So, by itself, I'm hesitant to read too deep into this, unlike some other sources I've seen. What I'm less hesitant to read into, though, is what ESO has to say about the Ysgramor's Chosen Paint Antiquities. Let me explain. You see, in 2020, the Elder Scrolls Online introduced a new mechanic called Antiquities, which opened up a number of sites the player could excavate via a new minigame to unlock a unique ancient reward, usually an apparel or cosmetic item of some kind, with some interesting lore attached to it. One of these new antiquities was called the Ysgramor's Chosen Body Markings, which could be dug up at a site in western Skyrim, and allowed the player to don some new body paint, evidently inspired from Ysgramor and the Nords' conquest of Skyrim in the Merethic era. This is what the body paint looks like. Notice anything? Yeah, it features the same exact patterns found in giant encampments and used on the painted cows. They're the same motifs! The game even calls the cosmetic item Atmoran body paint in the menus. Its codex description reads, quote, "The Skalds say that Ysgramor and his companions were the first to wear the blue war paint so many Nords still favor today. Supposedly, Ysgramor slew so many frost giants that he was covered in their blue blood, and the rest of his foes fled the field." End quote. Furthermore, an additional unique face paint could be unlocked as well, which featured its own enlightening description. Quote, "An important discovery. No one remembered what markings Ysgramor and his 500 companions wore on their faces. The spiral designs are symbols of death. The Atmorans wore them to show that they sought a glorious end in battle." End quote. There you have it. The spiral designs are ancient Atmoran symbols of death, mostly forgotten by modern Nords, but still honored by the giants of today. Like their Nordic cousins, giants seem to have come from Atmora. Indeed, the ESO book Giants, a Discourse, which we've already referenced a couple of times, further confirms this theory. Quote, "But nonetheless, we are connected to these giants, for we both share a common ancestor. The Atmorans were huge and smart. Nords descended from these ancient folk became the small, relatively speaking, intelligent people that we are today. Giants, on the other hand, became the huge, stupid creatures that we watch from a distance. Once we honored our cousins with offerings of cows, but this practice has fallen out of favor. Perhaps that is the detriment to Nordic villages and farms everywhere." End quote. Now, it should be noted that in the Old Nordic and Atmoran pantheons, the deity most often associated with death is Shor, or Lorkhan as he's known by the elves. More than just the god of death, Shor rules over Sovngarde, and is largely considered to be the head of the Nordic pantheon. Indeed, he's kinda like a combination of Zeus and Hades in his significance. So it's very possible that more than just paying homage to the concept of death, these spiral symbols are a declaration of the giants' piety, and by proxy Old Ysgramor's piety, towards Shor. This would introduce an entirely new explanation behind the giants' desecration of Malacath's shrine. You see, Malacath, before becoming a Daedra, was once the Aedric god Trinimac, venerated by elves, and it's believed by most people in Tamriel that long before recorded literate history began, Trinimac led mythical proto-elven armies against Shor and his armies of proto-humans in a series of battles now known as the Elnathay Wars, or the War of Manifest Metaphors. Ultimately, Shor and his armies of proto-men were defeated, and Trinimac personally ripped Shor's heart out of him in front of his men in the final confrontation. Trinimac's armies would eventually ultimately evolve into modern elves, and the defeated remnants of Shor's, of course, became the humans, and probably giants, of today. Sometime long after this war, through an unrelated process too complicated and obscure for me to explain in this video, Trinimac later transformed into the Daedric prince Malacath. Again, it's a long story involving Boethia, probably some weird portals and stuff, it's its own thing. But alas, now that we've all but confirmed the Giants' Atmoran origins and allegiance to Shor, it puts an entirely different spin on their desecration of Malacath's shrine. They're not just fighting some petty territorial dispute with neighboring orcs, they're avenging Shor, their god, by humiliating Trinimac's heir. It's an act of vengeance. Now, the codexes also mention that Ysgramor's blue paint was taken from the blood of frost giants back in the day, and the frost giants are frankly their own mystery. There's no real consensus on what these creatures are, and a thorough investigation of them specifically is also a little bit beyond the purview of this video. Hint, hint, we may have another one. My personal theory is that frost giants fought alongside the snow elves against Ysgramor and the humanoid giants during the conquest of Skyrim. And I think the fact that frost giants are most commonly found near snow elven ruins, far away from humans and giants, is a testament to that idea. But whatever the case, our giants, modern giants, seem to be using an entirely different paint anyway. They're not hunting frost giants anymore. Shifting gears a little bit here, also bear in mind that the two moons, Maser and Sukunda, are believed by many cultures to be the split essences of Shor, or Lorkhan. There's this idea that after his defeat, he was split in half and cast into the skies, becoming the two moons we see now. Thus, Sukunda's Kiss, this sacred ritual site giants seem to have in Whiterun, may have a different meaning than we previously thought. Speaking of Sukunda's Kiss, one final note I would like to leave you with is, remember all those obelisks all over the place? These giant rocks that giants just somehow seem to bring with them wherever they go? They don't seem to cut it out of the land, there's no quarries nearby, they just appear with them. How are they hauling these things? Well, I have a bit of a wacky theory. You see, in some of Skyrim's earliest concept art, that is, some of the first concept art ever produced well before the game was in full production, we can find a few interesting sketches left behind by the late Adam Adamowicz, whose ideas for Old Nordic ruins, culture, and attire really found a home in the game. Many of these old drawings feature ancient Nords in some primordial pre-recorded moment in history using levitation magic to move massive stones and megaliths around. Indeed, the concept art implies that many of the great Nord ruins we find across Skyrim were actually built with this telekinesis levitation magic stuff. Of course, concept art drawn up in 2008 with no further elaboration is far from proof of anything, but now that we've established a connection between the giants of Atmora of old and the old Nords who first came here, I wonder if maybe the giants could be moving these massive multi-ton stones and obelisks around, not with the sheer power of their muscles, but with their minds. Anyway, just a final wacky, kooky theory I thought I'd leave you guys with after everything else. But, ladies and gentlemen, that about does it for us today at this point in time. We set out to investigate the origins and nature of Skyrim's giants, and frankly, while we didn't solve every single mystery associated with them, I think we made some really, really dramatic progress. I'm very happy with how this investigation turned out, and I'm excited to see how this is elaborated upon in the future by Bethesda. But, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, we are going to finally wrap up. Now, I'm not entirely done with this subject yet. As I've said, there's some more research I want to do into frost giants, there's definitely some more research I want to do into primordial Atmora, and I'm currently working with another YouTuber named The Black Rose, go check him out, who has a very interesting theory on the identity of Shorv and her scene, and I think this is all kind of connected in one big thing, so we're going to come back to this in the future, but for right now, I need to go to bed. I am very, very, very tired, and yeah, I hope you, I don't know, if you need sleep, I hope you get it. If you want to stay up and keep watching more of these videos, that's also excellent. Whatever the case may be, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.